Welcome everybody. So I wanted to do a video here, obviously pretty low production as I'm just sitting here in my car, but I wanted to kind of break down a few of the thoughts that I'm having, really just open up the conversation and start getting us to look at the Maiden's method in a more practical way for those of you who are writers, storytellers, and start to see not just the analysis of the videos, because while a big part of this channel and some of the more clips and analysis videos and things are going to come out, none of them really quite hit what I think is going to be the biggest benefit to people. So I'm going to start putting out some of these discussions here, because I always just do, I think, better when I talk out loud. So might as well record it and put it out for your edification. So what I'm going to do in this video, for one, is I want to speak to the writing aspect of what you can expect from the Maiden's method, how you can use it to improve your stories, write better female characters, and basically not even necessarily worry about whether your character is male or female, but figure out how to do internal development for a character and not just an overarching story arc, which is something that the hero's journey is going to give you a little bit more of. For those of you who don't know, the Maiden's method was developed to be able to fit in as an interlocking complement as far as the hero's journey and where you see those steps. If I can put it this way, just as a teaser, and I'll go into this in a different video more, but basically the Maiden's method kind of starts at the Dark Night of the Soul. So where the hero has to descend into the darkness and figure out and confront things that are deeper into the abyss, the Insterquilinium Invenator, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Insterquilinius Invenator. I think off the top of my head, that's the in filth that will be found. So that idea of to go down into filth to extract the item of worth, that's the Maiden. The Maiden's true worth and value is, as, say, the Philosopher's Stone, any stone really, if you want to run with the metaphor, that she is going to be in the muck and the filth and has to be extracted, and that takes quite a bit of a process, one that we don't always think about. So if you want to develop that process within your characters and to be able to see internally how they're going through things, the Maiden's method is going to help you with that. So what I want to do today is just ask a couple of questions going along the stages for you as a writer to be able to ask yourself these questions of your own story and think, okay, how do I make my story better? So first step you need to do, granted, yeah, male, female, we can make this distinction. If you have a female main character, I would greatly encourage you to follow this first. If you're not hitting the points of the Maiden's method, granted, if you're obviously have never heard of this method before, you may be hitting them unintentionally, and there may be a few, what I've discovered in talking with writers, myself included, is that you might have a few of these roadblocks up, like you've just had writer's block for years and have no idea how to unlock this story. Well, this is a structure that's going to be able to help you with that. So regardless of the actual gender of your main character, ask yourself what their main motivation is. Are they being called and they don't want to answer that call? Or have they just completely outside of their own choosing, no one has consulted them on this, are they being abandoned? I mean, I might as well just use the same language, right? Are they being abandoned? Are they being let go, or are they the ones doing the leaving? Those who do the leaving are far more on a hero's journey pathway, because of course they're trying to embrace something in themselves that that has kind of always been there, that they're seeking for, and they're choosing to get up and go after. When the Maiden is taking something that has always been inside of them, it's usually subverted created by others and has to be extracted by, we'll go ahead and just say her later on, for the Maiden to start her story. The blackening stage, the first 3 steps occur within what's called the blackening stage. And this applies to the color stages for the development for a philosopher's stone itself. But let's focus on the 3 events that happen within that stage. Abandoned to subpar care, feminine threat rears its head, we'll say feminine threat rears its head, and being hidden away. Those things happen. I mean, it's the premise of most of these stories. It's one right after the other. Cinderella is abandoned by the death of her mother and the death of her father to the subpar care of her feminine threat that is the her stepmother and stepsisters, and then she is hidden away in her own home as a servant, and and yes, has her own little tower up there. Where she's not allowed to go out and just be part of the world. What's another? Yeah, we'll move on from that. It's pretty obvious. You can pull it out, and of course, we'll see the examples and other things where we have those first 3 things popping up right off the bat. So, in your story, if you're still developing a premise, you need to ask yourself, what's the motivation of my character? Have they been abandoned? Now, that doesn't have to be intentional. Sometimes, like leaving the nest, that's all that has happened, is that mom and dad said, okay, it's time for you to go. Well, that isn't necessarily something that is like a cruel act to say, oh, you abandoned me, but it can still feel like abandonment and being let go to something else. Even, again, involuntary death is something that occurs when these characters are orphaned all over the place. That's a very common occurrence, especially in some of the older stories like Hansel and Gretel. Actually, there's the abandonment on the part of the mother, but then that the father actually does, well, choose his wife over them, and that is one of those acts that we condemn, for him in the middle of famine to take the advice of of their stepmother, his wife, that says, well, 2 mouths are a lot easier to feed than 4. So they take their last bit of bread, sprinkling crumbs all the way along off to their death in the woods. Now, that's, again, a simultaneous feminine threat and being hidden away. Their hidden away is that they're actually kind of going off into the cottage, and there are 2 instances in the original Grimm fairy tales story where Hansel and Gretel, they kind of get tucked away and they go off and they follow the breadcrumb trail and everything. They leave that along the way but then eventually find their way back. I believe it might even be stones in one of those. That's why the birds come eventually for the breadcrumbs. But the abandonment of the father in that case, the abandonment of the father, say in Princess Diaries, when her father abdicated, or didn't want to abdicate his role, but as king, but did abdicate his role as her father. And so that's something that she still has a love for him. She still wants to perceive, even when he was alive, but not really part of her life. Of course, by the time the movie starts, he's passed away. But that wasn't the initial abandonment. The abandonment was him choosing his life of royalty and the choice that she's eventually going to have to make. So when you're asking yourself if your character has been thrown out of the nest, or have they flown out of the nest, if I can put it that way. So the feminine threat, when deciding who that is, of course, again, gender isn't always the idea here. What it is, you have to ask yourself, are you looking at the hyper masculine or the hyper feminine? The hyper masculine is going to be all about order. The hyper feminine is going to be all about chaos. Of course, we've got to be careful about how we're breaking those down, because no one likes to hear that femininity is chaos. But at the same time, you've got to ask yourself, where does creation come from? It comes from chaos. It comes from division. It comes from even cellular mitosis. You have to divide in order to create, right? So if everything is just order, 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 you can actually find death in that too, where you're not creating life and you find a stagnancy. So your feminine thread is going to be one of those that can be a very chaotic male. We will say actually V from V for Vendetta is Evie's feminine threat, because all he's about is 100% chaos. He is trying to dismantle the hyper order of society in order to break everything down, create a chaos enough for society itself to then find their moments for revival. And so when you have your feminine threat, you've got to decide whether she's a hag, a snow queen, or a dragon. So when you have these three elements, your main motivations, again, this is always what you're going to be coming down to when you're looking for your archetypes. The hag wants to consume. The hag wants to stay alive at all costs. She might be beautiful, she might be ugly. If she's beautiful on the outside, she's horrific on the inside. Figure that. So, and that can also be a descriptor of the Snow Queen, but we'll get there. Any one of them could be beautiful, really, if I'm going to just lay that out as a side note here. But for the hag, her decisions always come down to this idea where if she can perpetuate her own existence at the detriment of others, that's, there's very little moral compass among the hag. Usually she's willing to go after children, easy prey, the wounded of the herd. She's not very sophisticated, and neither is her prey. She's very animalistic, driven by hunger, sex, youth, and trying to perpetuate these things, willing to suck dry the host body to make sure that she, the leech, is able to persist. It is not a symbiotic relationship, it's a parasitic one. So when you move into the Snow Queen, then her main motivation is that you have to ask yourself is she trying to freeze everything? Is she trying to create a perpetual winter? Does she want her world to stay as it is? Is she setting up a bunch of frozen reflective surfaces surrounding herself so that she has a bunch of mirrors around her that she's never actually engaging with, except that she's only talking to herself, and tends to close herself off from the reality of the world? The Snow Queen is heavy in denial. The Snow Queen is going to be raging against the summer. She's raging against the coming of the light. She doesn't want tenderness or warmth or anything that's going to melt her exterior, anything that's going to make the world that she has created for herself any sort of threat to that world for her. And that's where vanity can cross lines a little bit between the hags and the Snow Queens. That's where the queen in Snow White actually regresses from a Snow Queen into a hag. And you can watch that progression. She starts out with vanity and trying to perpetuate her world, and in the deep throes of realizing that she can't perpetuate her youth anymore, she almost accepts it by becoming this hag just to take Snow White down anyway. So when you have a dragon, and this is something where it leads me into that, because it's almost dragon-like for her to decide, oh, I don't even care if I die as long as you die. That's one of those where the dragon would rather see the world burn than to and be queen of the ashes than to rule over something that is realistically the world that she wants to live in. The dragon is all about hoarding. If you don't know, the classic stories about dragons spoke a lot more about them blocking water sources is a pretty common thing that they would do. That they would sacrifices of purity would need to be made to them, or they would hoard the treasure that was given to them as some sort of sacrifice, and then they would hoard virgins that were given to them as some sort of sacrifice. See St. George story. You've got then the hoards of treasure is going to be a big point as far as the maiden along her progression is concerned. Any feminine threat that would gladly spit poison and even swallow some of it herself to ensure that her treasure was not actually going to go to anyone but her. It's the miser aspect of these things. Let's see. A good dragon is going to be Regina George. She eventually, with the Burn book, oddly enough, she is one that she writes her own name, calling herself a fugly slut, and puts all of that in the book itself to be able to then allow that to take down the rest of the girls. She would rather see herself destroyed than to see others succeed. So when you've identified your feminine threat, then you can start to play around. Look, if they bleed into each other, excuse me, all the more interesting. These are building blocks. I have recognized these patterns because of the things that have already fallen into them. But hey, as we start to identify it, and you can say this is a person that is a feminine threat starting as a dragon that regresses to a snow queen, or someone that actually starts as a hag and then they get to a snow queen and then they become a dragon, and you think they're actually going to complete their method and then they don't. Might be really tragic and beautiful and really good story. So do what you can with it. That'd be interesting. Hidden Away, and we're only going to have time to cover this here. Then I'll end at Hidden Away, and we'll say that we've just covered the Blackening Stage for today, in how to ask yourself, can the Maiden's method make my writing better? Hidden Away is one of those stages that, yes, it can be literal. She can be stuck in a dungeon. She can be locked away in a tower. She can She can have a mask on her face. The point is that she's being cut off from the world. Reality is a big theme throughout the Maiden's method. And as long as the Maiden is confronting a reality and never actually reconciling with the truth, then she's never going to complete the method. The falseness that she's been introduced to start right here at the Hidden Away stage. So she's been shown a world that is false. Her outside reality that is just outside of the window of her tower is not true. You have first thing that comes to my mind is Belle. She's been given a window to the outside world. Show me the beast. She has the ability to hold that mirror up to the world and show the beast. But he's roaring in pain because he misses her, and they all perceive that incorrectly. That window into the world, though it shows reality, is misperceived. The Lady of Shalott, when she is sitting there, she weaves by night and day, a web of gold, her colors gay. She's weaving a web of colors based on the reflection she sees of Camelot out her back window. Interesting poem. It's absolutely beautiful. Follows the Maiden's method in a really crazy way. But you have a warped perception of the world based on this tiny little tower window that you've been given through which to see it. And for these three things to compound, it sounds pretty dark, and it is. You start to ask yourself, does anyone really love me? You don't know what truth is anymore. You know what you used to have and don't. You might have a dream about something that was told to you of, or you've been cursed, you know, and she has heard a whisper say, a curse is on her if she stay. She knows not what the curse may be, and so she weaveth steadily, that Lady of Shalott. Those kinds of lines are shown as a example of the misperception of one's world as an internal character. When you're struggling with an identity and you're trying to find out who you are, you need to not only know who you are, what you are, but who you are in this world and in your relation to this world. Others are always going to translate of the self 100%. It's just the way the world works as far as we can tell. So if there is a struggle with self, you need to be able to have that self-identification in the midst of it as well. For a character, what that's going to translate to is, first you need to be able to find out where your character is here and now, but why. And that why comes down to who abandoned them, who now threatens them, and who is hiding them away or not allowing them to be part of the world. We will start to discuss a few more things as far as the Maiden being her own feminine threat, the doppelgangers, and all of that fun stuff. We're going to bleed right back into Hidden Away when we start talking about some of the the manufactured companions. I'm talking too quickly for my own good. We're going to talk about the manufactured companions in the next video when we hit the whitening stage, and that's going to keep us right here with the doppelganger phase and the Maiden even hiding herself away. So stay tuned for that, and otherwise, I hope that this has helped. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe. You know the deal, and have a great day.